Hello everyone. Before we begin today's story, I have a small favor to ask. Please hit subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you never miss our channel's new videos. It's quick, free, and the best way to support us in bringing you more dramatic stories. Your support means the world to us. Where are you watching from? Drop your city or country in the comments below. Thank you very much. Now let's dive into the story. Mark sat there, his mind still reeling from the conversation he had just had. The words, "marry me," echoed in his head, but they didn't seem to belong to the world he knew. This was not how he imagined his life would go. He had been working tirelessly to pay off his father's debts, barely scraping by, and now here he was, sitting across from Eleanor Brooks, the powerful CEO of a multi-million-dollar corporation who had just offered him a business deal of a lifetime. He looked at her, her cool demeanor unwavering as she sat there, watching him carefully. "You'll have time to think about it," Eleanor added, her voice smooth and steady. "But I need you to make a decision soon. Time is of the essence, Mr. Davis." He nodded absently, his gaze drifting toward the window, watching the rain continue to fall outside. His mind was a whirlwind of emotions, but he knew one thing for sure. He could not afford to turn down this offer. The financial strain he had been under for years had worn him down. This could be his chance to change everything. He had no idea what he was getting into, but the weight of his circumstances made it feel like the only option. The idea of marrying a stranger for the sake of security was not something he ever imagined, but here he was, considering it. As he left the bistro, Mark's mind was still heavy with doubt and uncertainty. The rain had stopped, but his thoughts continued to race, as if the world was spinning faster than he could keep up with. He walked slowly to his apartment, his footsteps echoing on the wet pavement. When he finally reached his door, he took a deep breath and unlocked it. Inside, his small, dimly lit apartment felt like a prison. The walls seemed to close in on him as he tossed his keys onto the table. His mother's voice echoed in his mind, reminding him of the sacrifices she had made for him, of the promises he had made to her to make things right. But what choice did he have? He needed a way out, a way to secure his future, and this deal with Eleanor was the only lifeline he could see. He sank down onto the couch, rubbing his temples in frustration. For the first time in his life, Mark felt completely helpless. He stared at the ceiling, the weight of the decision pressing down on him. He could almost hear his father's voice, the man who had once been the pillar of their family, telling him to do what was necessary to survive. "Sometimes, you have to make hard choices," his father had always said. "You can't let pride stand in the way of your future." Mark closed his eyes, and for a brief moment, he thought about walking away. But then he thought about his mother, the debts, the looming threat of losing everything, and he knew what he had to do. He had to take the deal. He had to marry Eleanor Brooks. The next morning, Mark woke up early, his mind still clouded with doubt. He had made the decision the night before, but it didn't make it any easier. He dressed quickly, grabbed his bag, and left his apartment, determined to stick to his decision. He couldn't afford to back out now. He arrived at the office of Eleanor's company, Carter Enterprises, just before noon. The building was an imposing structure, towering over the surrounding buildings. Mark had never been in a place like this before. The sleek, modern interior made him feel small, out of place. As he approached the reception desk, he was greeted by a woman in a sharp suit who directed him to an elevator. The ride up to the top floor seemed to take forever, and by the time the doors opened, Mark felt his nerves spike. Eleanor was waiting for him, her presence commanding the room. She stood by the window, looking out over the city, her posture straight, as if she owned the entire skyline. Mark stepped inside, and Eleanor turned to face him. "Mr. Davis," she said, her voice cool and calm, "I'm glad you could make it. Please, take a seat." Mark hesitated for a moment, before sitting down across from her. The room was pristine, decorated in minimalist style, the kind of luxury that Mark had only seen in magazines. "Have you made your decision?" Eleanor asked, her gaze steady, never wavering. Mark took a deep breath, his heart racing. "Yes," he said, his voice firm, though his mind was still a storm of emotions. "I'll do it. I'll marry you." Eleanor nodded slightly, as if she had expected no other answer. "Good," she said, her expression softening just a fraction. "Let's get the paperwork started." Mark felt a knot tighten in his stomach, but he couldn't back out now. He had made his choice. This was the only way forward. And as much as it scared him, Part of him was starting to wonder if maybe, just maybe, this deal with Eleanor could be the start of something more. Mark walked into the lavish office, the air thick with both anticipation and unease. Eleanor was seated behind her large mahogany desk, reviewing documents, her sharp gaze flicking up as he approached. There was something about the way she carried herself, the way she effortlessly commanded the room, that both intimidated and intrigued him. He had agreed to the deal, but now that it was real, the weight of the decision hit him harder than ever. "Please, sit," Eleanor said, gesturing to the chair across from her. Mark sat down, his palms sweating despite the cool air of the office. "I've made the arrangements," she continued, her voice steady but carrying an undertone of authority. "The contract is finalized. All that's left is for you to sign." Mark nodded, but his mind was far from the paperwork in front of him. He looked at the contract, then back at Eleanor. There was a part of him that still couldn't quite believe this was happening. He was about to marry a woman he barely knew for the sake of a business deal. It felt surreal, like some strange dream he would wake up from at any moment. But there was no turning back now. "Are you sure about this?" Eleanor asked, her voice softening just a fraction as she noticed the hesitation in his eyes. "You're not just doing this for the money, are you?" Her words caught him off guard, and for a moment, Mark faltered. He opened his mouth to speak, but nothing came out. He had told himself it was just business, nothing more. But in that moment, looking at Eleanor, so calm, so confident, he felt something shift inside him. I'm doing this because I need to. For my future, and for my family," he finally said, his voice steady, though his heart raced. Eleanor studied him for a long moment before nodding. "That's all I needed to hear." She pushed the papers toward him, a pen resting on top. Mark reached for the pen, his fingers trembling slightly. As he signed the contract, he couldn't help but wonder what he was getting himself into. He had agreed to the deal, but would it change him? Would it change them both? After he signed, Eleanor stood, extending her hand to him. "Welcome to the family, Mr. Davis." Her words felt heavy, and despite the calm smile on her face, Mark couldn't shake the feeling that this was only the beginning of something much more complicated than he had anticipated. He shook her hand, the coldness of the gesture making his stomach tighten. As they walked out of her office, he couldn't help but feel a shift in the air. This was no longer just a business deal. Something had changed. Eleanor had become more than just a business partner. And he, despite his best intentions, was beginning to feel the weight of that change. He had agreed to this arrangement for survival, but as he looked at Eleanor, he wondered if there was more to this than he had realized. The road ahead seemed uncertain, filled with questions he didn't yet have the answers to. But for now, all he could do was move forward. As they left the building, Mark's mind raced. Eleanor's words, her presence, everything was now in motion. This wasn't just a business deal anymore. It was something else. Something that, whether he liked it or not, was beginning to pull him in deeper than he ever expected. The days that followed were a blur of meetings, paperwork, and public events. Mark found himself thrown into a world he didn't recognize, a world of luxury and high society that felt completely foreign to him. His first official event as Eleanor's husband was a charity gala, held at one of the most prestigious venues in the city. The grand ballroom was filled with people in exquisite attire, their laughter and conversation blending with the soft strains of a live orchestra. Mark stood by Eleanor's side, feeling like a fish out of water. She moved through the crowd with the ease of someone who belonged, her presence commanding attention from every direction. Mark, on the other hand, felt small in comparison. He had always been the quiet guy, the one who preferred to stay out of the spotlight. But here he was, standing next to a woman who was the center of attention in a room full of millionaires and CEOs. As the night wore on, Mark couldn't shake the feeling that he was pretending. He was pretending to be someone he wasn't, and deep down, he knew it. The applause that followed Eleanor's speech felt deafening to him. People gathered around her, eager to congratulate her on her latest charitable initiative, but Mark couldn't help but notice the way they glanced at him. He was the outsider, the one who didn't quite belong. After a while, Eleanor excused herself from the group and turned to Mark, her expression softening for the first time that evening. "You're doing fine," she said, her voice low. "I know this is all new to you, but you're handling it well." Mark forced a smile, but it didn't reach his eyes. "I'm just trying to keep up," he said, his voice betraying a hint of insecurity. Eleanor studied him for a moment. her sharp gaze taking in every detail. "You don't have to try so hard," she said softly. "You're here because I wanted you here. Don't forget that." Her words, though meant to reassure him, only made him feel more out of place. He wasn't sure if he was here because she wanted him or because he was a means to an end, someone to help her secure her legacy. The thought gnawed at him, but he kept it to himself. As the evening drew to a close, Eleanor led him to the car waiting outside. Mark slid into the back seat, his mind still swirling. He could hear the faint hum of the city as they drove through the streets, but his thoughts were far away. Was this really what he wanted? To live this life, to be married to a woman he barely knew, all for the sake of money and status? The car stopped in front of their building, and Eleanor turned to him. "Tomorrow, we have another event," she said, her tone businesslike. "You'll be expected to attend." Mark nodded, though he didn't know if he was ready for another night like this. Another night of pretending. He stepped out of the car, following her inside, but his mind was already miles away. He had agreed to this deal, but he couldn't help but feel like he was losing a part of himself with every step he took into this new life. As they entered the building, Eleanor's hand brushed against his, a fleeting touch that felt oddly familiar. Mark looked at her, his heart racing for a reason he couldn't quite explain. It was just a touch, a simple gesture, but it lingered in his mind, making him question everything he thought he knew about this arrangement. He had agreed to marry her, to play this role in her life. But what if there was something more to this than just business? What if, despite all the walls he had built around himself, he was starting to feel something real? The following week felt like a whirlwind. Mark found himself constantly moving between events, meetings, and charity galas, all the while struggling to shake off the feeling of being a stranger in his own life. He had agreed to the arrangement with Eleanor, and now he was bound to it, both legally and emotionally. Eleanor, on the other hand, seemed to glide through everything with effortless grace. She was always poised, always in control. Yet, every now and then, Mark noticed a subtle shift in her demeanor, something that hinted at a vulnerability she kept hidden beneath her polished exterior. But he didn't dare bring it up. It was one evening, after a particularly long and exhausting event, when they found themselves alone in their penthouse. Eleanor had just returned from a business dinner, and Mark was sitting on the couch, going through some papers. The weight of the day hung heavy in the air, and for once, the two of them sat in silence, the usual chatter of social obligations forgotten. Eleanor was the first to speak. "Mark," she said quietly, her voice unusually soft. He looked up at her, surprised by the change in her tone. "You've been quieter than usual. Is everything all right?" He hesitated, unsure of what to say. "I'm just trying to adjust, I guess." He ran a hand through his hair, his exhaustion catching up with him. "This whole thing, it's not what I thought it would be." Eleanor's gaze softened as she walked over to the couch and sat beside him. "I know it's a lot to take in," she said, "but you're not alone in this. I'm here. We're in this together, remember?" Mark felt a knot tighten in his chest at her words. They were kind, but they didn't feel like they came from someone who was genuinely invested in him. Instead, they felt like part of the arrangement, something Eleanor said because it was expected. "I didn't expect any of this," he confessed. "I didn't expect to be living this life. I didn't expect this." He gestured vaguely between the two of them, the contract, the public appearances, the constant pretending. Eleanor sat quietly for a moment, then placed a hand on his. It was a simple gesture, but it sent a shiver down his spine. "I never meant for you to feel like this was just a business deal," she said softly. "I know it's hard to believe, but I'm trying to make this work. I want this partnership to be real, Mark. Not just on paper." Mark stared at her hand on his heart racing. There was something in her eyes now, something that made him question everything he thought he knew about this arrangement. Was it possible that Eleanor felt the same way? Was there more to their marriage than just a contractual obligation? He shook his head, pushing the thought aside. He couldn't let himself get caught up in emotions. This was still a business arrangement. He had to keep reminding himself of that. "I just don't know where this is going," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. Eleanor squeezed his hand gently, her voice steady and comforting. "You don't have to know right now," she replied. "Just take it one day at a time. We'll figure it out together." The words lingered in the air between them, and for the first time in a long while, Mark felt something stir within him, something he had tried to bury for weeks. He didn't know what the future held, but in that moment, With Eleanor's hand in his and the warmth of the apartment surrounding him, he couldn't help but wonder if there might be more to this arrangement than he had ever anticipated. The days that followed were both unsettling and eye-opening for Mark. Eleanor's words echoed in his mind. Asterisk, we'll figure it out together. Asterisk, it wasn't just the business deal anymore. The more time he spent with her, the more complicated everything became. Every public event, every meeting, every casual dinner with the elite felt like a mask he had to wear. But there were moments, small moments, where he felt a flicker of something deeper between them. Late one night, after a charity event where they had to play their roles as the perfect couple, Eleanor invited him to her private study. The room was dimly lit, and the soft glow of the desk lamp cast shadows across her face. She had removed her makeup, and for the first time since they had started this arrangement, Mark saw her without her usual veneer of control. She looked human. "Mark," she said quietly, sitting down at her desk and pushing aside a stack of papers. "We need to talk." Her tone was serious, but there was something more, something vulnerable in her voice that made Mark's heart race. "About what?" he asked, his voice guarded. "About us," she replied. There it was again, that word. Us. Mark felt his stomach tighten. This wasn't what he had expected when he signed the papers. He had told himself it was just a business arrangement, but somewhere along the way, things had become muddled. He wasn't sure when it had happened, but he had begun to question his own feelings. Eleanor studied him for a long moment, her eyes sharp yet soft at the same time. "I know this isn't easy for you. I know you didn't sign up for anything personal," she said, her voice steady, though her eyes betrayed a hint of uncertainty. "But the truth is, I didn't either. I thought this would be simple, a transaction, a way to secure my legacy and to help you with your debts. But I don't want to pretend anymore, Mark. I don't want to just go through the motions." Mark opened his mouth to speak, but no words came out. He had always prided himself on his ability to stay composed, but this was different. His chest felt tight, and the weight of his own conflicting emotions made it hard to breathe. "You don't have to feel the same way," she continued, her voice softer now, almost hesitant. "I know this wasn't supposed to be about love, but it's hard to ignore what's between us." Mark swallowed hard. Was he hearing this right? He couldn't deny that he had started to feel something more than just gratitude or obligation. But what was he supposed to do with these feelings? What if he was just getting swept up in a fantasy, in the idea of a perfect life that wasn't even real? "Eleanor," he started, but she cut him off. "I'm not asking for anything from you," she said quickly. "I just wanted to be honest with you. I don't want to keep pretending that this is all just business. There's more to this, and I need you to know that." The silence that followed was thick with tension. Mark felt as if the entire world had shifted beneath his feet. He had never imagined that a simple contract would lead him here, questioning his own heart, his own motives. Eleanor was right. There was something between them, something that went beyond the surface of their deal. But he wasn't sure if it was enough to risk everything, his reputation, his future, and his own sense of self. He stared at her for a moment, his mind racing with 1,000 thoughts. Finally, he spoke, his voice low but steady. "I don't know what to say," he admitted. "This wasn't what I expected, and I'm not sure I'm ready for this. For whatever it is we have." Eleanor nodded, her expression unreadable. "I understand," she said softly. "But I needed to say it. I needed to be honest with you, because I can't keep pretending either." They sat in silence for a long while, the weight of the unspoken hanging heavily in the air. Mark wasn't sure what the future held, or what this strange, complicated relationship meant. But one thing was certain. Things were changing between them, and he wasn't sure how much longer he could keep pretending it was all just business. The days following their conversation felt strangely heavy for Mark. Eleanor had confessed her feelings, and though she had assured him that she didn't expect anything in return, the words lingered in his mind. He couldn't shake the thought that maybe, just maybe, there was more to their arrangement than he had ever believed. They had always been two people from different worlds, a businessman and a law student, a billionaire and someone just trying to survive. But now, after hearing her speak so openly, Mark began to question the boundaries they had set for themselves. Was there room for something more? He didn't know. Every time he saw her, he couldn't help but wonder if he was falling for her, or if he was just getting caught up in the idea of a life he never imagined for himself. It was early one morning when the storm finally hit. Mark woke up to the sound of his phone ringing. He picked it up, still groggy from sleep. It was from Eleanor's assistant. "Mr. Davis, Mrs. Brooks needs you at the office. There's a situation she needs your help with." Mark's heart raced. A situation? What was going on? He quickly got dressed and headed out. When he arrived at the office, he found Eleanor standing by the window, her expression unreadable. She turned to face him as he entered, her sharp gaze quickly softening when she saw him. "Mark," she said quietly, her voice calm but with a hint of tension. "I need you to sign these papers. There's something going on with the company that requires our immediate attention." He nodded, trying to keep his composure. But as he looked at the papers, something caught his eye, documents about the company's future, about its financial situation, and about potential threats from competitors. It wasn't just business anymore. It was a matter of survival. As they discussed the details, Mark felt the weight of the situation pressing on him. This wasn't just about the deal anymore. It was about protecting the future, not just Eleanor's, but his as well. She needed him, and he realized, with a sudden clarity, that he needed her too. They weren't just partners in this business arrangement. They were in this together, whether they liked it or not. After they finished going over the documents, Eleanor looked at him, her gaze steady. "I know this is a lot to handle, but I can't do this without you. You've proven yourself more than capable, Mark. I know I've asked a lot of you, but I'm asking you to trust me now. We're stronger together." Mark looked at her, the weight of her words sinking in. He had always thought of this as a temporary arrangement, something to get him out of debt, a way to survive. But now, he realized that it was more than that. She was asking him to be part of something bigger, something that would change both of their futures. "I trust you," Mark said finally, his voice firm. "I'll do whatever it takes." Eleanor gave him a small, approving nod, her eyes softening. "Good. I'm glad to hear that." As they stood there, Mark felt something shift between them. It was subtle, but it was there, a connection that had grown from mutual respect and necessity. It was no longer just about business. It was about trust, about building something together. And maybe, just maybe, it was about something more. But that was a thought he wasn't quite ready to face yet. The days after their conversation felt like a new chapter, one that Mark wasn't sure he was ready for. He had agreed to Eleanor's request, trusted her, and in return, she had entrusted him with more responsibility than he ever expected. It was no longer just about marriage on paper or business deals. They had become partners, in a way that Mark hadn't anticipated. Their bond was stronger now, built on trust and shared goals. But as much as he tried to focus on the work, there was still something in the back of his mind, the growing feelings that were difficult to ignore. One evening, after a long week of meetings and strategy sessions, Mark found himself sitting alone in the penthouse, staring out at the city lights. The silence in the apartment was overwhelming. He had been avoiding Eleanor's gaze lately, unsure of how to act around her. He knew she felt it too, the tension that lingered between them. He heard the soft click of the door, and Eleanor walked in, her heels clicking lightly on the floor as she entered the living room. She looked as composed as ever, but there was something in her eyes that told Mark she had been thinking about their conversation, too. "We need to talk," she said, her voice steady but soft. Mark turned to face her, his heart thudding in his chest. "About what?" he asked, trying to keep his voice neutral. "About us," she replied, her gaze unwavering. "About where we go from here." Mark felt a lump form in his throat. He had known this moment would come, but he wasn't ready for it. They had both spent weeks navigating the complex waters of their arrangement. But now the question loomed. What did they want from each other? He stood up, running a hand through his hair, and walked over to the window. "Eleanor," he began, his voice quiet, "I never expected any of this. I came into this arrangement thinking it was just a way to fix things, to get out of debt, to survive." He paused, glancing over at her. "But now, I'm not sure anymore." She stepped closer, her eyes filled with an intensity he couldn't look away from. "You don't have to be sure right now," she said, her voice steady but softer than usual. "But I think it's time we stop pretending." Mark looked at her, confusion and curiosity mixing in his chest. "Stop pretending," he repeated. "Pretending that this is just a business deal. That we're just doing this for practical reasons," she said, her tone steady. But there was a vulnerability in her voice that made Mark's heart skip a beat. "I want more, Mark. I know this is complicated, and I know you didn't sign up for this, but I need you to know this wasn't just a business arrangement for me. I'm starting to feel something real. The words hung in the air, and for a moment, Mark didn't know how to respond. His heart was racing, his mind scrambling to process what she was saying. Was she telling him she loved him? Or was this just another complicated step in their arrangement? He swallowed hard, his throat dry. Eleanor, I don't know what to say. I'm not sure if I'm ready for this. Everything's moving so fast. She nodded slowly, stepping closer to him. I understand, she said quietly. But I can't keep pretending either. I'm not asking you to feel the same way, not yet. But I needed you to know how I feel. Mark looked into her eyes, and for the first time since this all started, he felt like he was seeing her clearly, truly seeing her. She wasn't just the strong, confident CEO. She was a woman who had been through her own struggles, a woman who was now opening herself up to him in a way he didn't expect. He took a deep breath and nodded slowly. I don't know where this is going, Eleanor, he said quietly. But I'm willing to see where it goes. Together. Eleanor smiled softly, a genuine warmth in her expression. That's all I needed to hear, she said, her voice filled with relief. In that moment, everything felt different. The tension that had been building between them for weeks suddenly lifted, replaced by something new, a sense of possibility. It was no longer just about a contract or business. It was about the beginning of something real, something neither of them could have predicted. Weeks passed, and what had started as a business arrangement between Mark and Eleanor slowly transformed into something deeper. The tension between them had faded, replaced by a mutual understanding and respect that neither had expected. They were no longer just partners in name. They had become something more, something real. The company was thriving, the weight of the financial pressures lifting with each successful venture. Eleanor had become more than just a business partner to Mark. She was someone he could rely on, someone who understood him in a way that no one else ever had. The bond they shared had grown stronger, and with it, Mark's feelings for her had deepened. He found himself thinking about her when she wasn't around, missing her presence in ways he hadn't anticipated. Eleanor, too, had begun to let her guard down. She had always been the confident, composed CEO, but Mark had seen sides of her that no one else had, her vulnerability, her quiet moments of uncertainty. In turn, he had shared parts of himself he had kept hidden for years. They were no longer just a marriage of convenience. They had built something from the ground up, something grounded in trust, respect, and, surprisingly, love. It was a late evening when the moment came. They had just returned from a meeting with investors, and the stress of the day was beginning to wear on both of them. As they entered their penthouse, Eleanor kicked off her heels and sank into the couch, rubbing her temples. Mark watched her for a moment, his heart swelling with a mix of admiration and affection. He had never seen her like this before, tired, but not defeated. She was human. Eleanor, he said softly, sitting down beside her. She looked up at him, her expression weary but warm. What is it? She asked, her voice gentle. Mark hesitated for a moment, his heart pounding in his chest. This wasn't just about the business anymore. It was about them. I've been thinking, he began, his voice low but steady, about everything that's happened between us. And I realize now that I don't want this to just be a partnership. I don't want us to just be business partners. Eleanor's eyes softened, her gaze never leaving his. She didn't say anything, but the look in her eyes spoke volumes. Mark took a deep breath, the weight of his feelings finally coming to the surface. I love you, Eleanor, he said quietly, his voice filled with sincerity. I love you more than I ever thought possible. The words hung in the air between them, and for a moment, there was nothing but silence. Eleanor's eyes widened slightly, and for a split second, Mark feared he had said too much. But then, a smile slowly spread across her face, a smile that reached her eyes and made her look more beautiful than ever. I love you too, Mark, she whispered, her voice thick with emotion. And in that moment, everything changed. The years of pretending, the contract they had signed, the business arrangement that had brought them together, none of it mattered anymore. All that mattered was the love they had found in each other. The love that had grown quietly, steadily, over time. As they sat together on the couch, hands intertwined, the future seemed full of possibilities. They had started with a deal, but now they had something far greater. A partnership built on love, trust, and a shared future. They had found something real. And for the first time in a long time, both of them felt like they were exactly where they were meant to be.